I always thought that we would make much more progress in space. And it just didn't happen. It was really disappointing. So, yeah, I was really quite bothered by it. So, when we went to the moon, we were supposed to have a base on the moon. We were supposed to send people to Mars, and that stuff just didn't happen. We went backwards. We got the space shuttle, but the space shuttle could only go to low Earth orbit, whereas Saturn V could go to the moon. Now the space shuttle's gone, and so that just seemed like a really bad thing. So I came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong. That in fact, there's a great deal of will. There's not such a shortage, but people don't think there's a way, and that if people thought there was a way, or at least something that wouldn't break the federal budget, then people would support it. If there could be sort of a small philanthropic mission to Mars, so I was expecting to lose all the money that I invested in that. But if we could send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars with seeds in dehydrated nutrient gel, and you hydrate it upon landing, and you'd have this great shot of little greenhouse with little green plants on a red background. I thought that would get people excited.
So you're literally.
I mean, I'd like to be able to go to Mars while I'm still able to manage the journey reasonably well. So I think I don't want to be like 75 and go to Mars.
You don't want to take yours in.
The goal with SpaceX is to improve rocket technology and spacecraft technology, and keep improving it every year until ultimately we're able to send people to Mars and establish a self-sustaining base on Mars. I'm a big fan of NASA. In fact, at one point, my password was "I love NASA." I mean, I've been sort of toying with the design for an electric supersonic vertical takeoff and landing electric aircraft for a while. I'd love to do it, but I think my mind would explode. It's like the brain's worn out, I thought my initial supposition was wrong. And so what I thought really was that we'd lost the will to explore, that we'd lost the will to push the boundary. And in retrospect, that was actually a very foolish error. Because the United States is a nation of explorers. The United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. It's ludicrous to actually, in retrospect, to have made such an assumption. But people need to believe that it's possible, and that it's not going to bankrupt them. They're not going to have to give up something important like healthcare. It's going to be a cost that isn't going to meaningfully affect their standard of living. It's not, like I said, it's not a question of will, it's a question of way. I kind of worry that we've hit this, I don't know whether our technology level will keep going or subside. And for the first time in 4.5 billion years, the technology level is at the point where we can extend life to another planet, make life multiplanetary. Humanity doesn't land on Mars in my lifetime, I'd be really disappointed. That would be, that would probably be my biggest disappointment.
Help you out?
Yeah, three quite interesting trips to Russia to try to negotiate purchase of 2 Russian ICBMs. Yeah.
And did they think you had evil intent?
No, they just thought I was crazy. But I mean, that's not good either, if you're buying ICBMs. But minus the nuke. I mean, I think that would have been a lot more. Anyway, so I came to the conclusion that there wasn't really a good reason for rockets to be so expensive, and that they could be a lot less, and even in expendable format, they could be less, and that if one could make them reusable, like airplanes, then the cost of rocketry would drop dramatically. The cost of space travel would drop dramatically. So that's, and what makes it super insane is that we're going to run out of oil anyway. Like, it's not like there's some infinite oil supply. We're going to run out of it. So we know we have to get to a sustainable means of transportation no matter what. So why even run the experiment?
Right.
It's the world's dumbest experiment. And in fact, the original reason I came to Silicon Valley was to work on electric vehicle energy storage technology.
Right.
And I thought that that the big car companies would develop electric cars, because obviously the right move. And I thought that was vindicated when General Motors and Toyota announced their, General Motors was doing the EV1, the electric vehicle one. Toyota did the electric RAV4, the original one. And then when California relaxed its regulations on electric cars, GM recalled all of the EV1s and crushed them into little cubes. When was the last time you heard about any company, customers holding a candlelit vigil for the demise of that product? Particularly a GM product. Solar is kind of part of the whole sustainable energy thing. So sustainable energy, you have to have sustainable means of producing and consuming energy. And so even if you have electric cars, you have to have the other side of the equation. Say, how do you produce energy in a sustainable way? There's just a tiny amount of energy that people consume to power civilization. It's actually a very tiny amount of energy relative to the amount of energy that the sun sends in our general direction. Making standard efficiency solar panels is about as hard as making drywall. It's really easy. In fact, I'd say drywall is probably harder. But what is a thorny problem is trying to figure out how to get solar on tens of thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands of rooftops.
It's a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And therefore there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. Things that are, like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and sort of better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. And obviously the things that I believe in, like extending life beyond Earth, making life multiplanetary. I'm a big believer in sort of Asimov's Foundation series, or the principle that you really want to, I recommend reading the Foundation series, but it's like if you know that there's likely to be, we don't know, but there's likely to be another Dark Ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter Dark Ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Then we want to make sure that there's enough of a seed of human civilization somewhere else to bring civilization back, and perhaps shorten the length of the Dark Ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base. But I think a moon base and a Mars base that could perhaps help regenerate life back here on Earth would be really important, and to get that done before a possible World War III. Well, I like the definition of the AI should try to maximize the freedom of action of humanity. Maximize the freedom of action. maximize freedom, essentially. I like that definition. But we do want a close coupling between collective human intelligence and digital intelligence. Nuralink is trying to help in that regard by creating an interface between a high bandwidth interface between AI and human brain. We're already a cyborg in the sense that your phone and your computer are kind of an extension of you.
Just low bandwidth input output.
Exactly, it's just low bandwidth, particularly output. I mean, 2 thumbs basically. But it's a bit like Ian Banks' neural lace, but in the case of neural lace, it's sort of that's there from when you're born, or it's more of a
backup.
Sorry?
It's a backup.
Yeah, kind of a backup. This would be there's a digital extension of you that is an AI, the AI extension of you, a tertiary layer of intelligence. So you've got your limbic system, your cortex, and the tertiary layer, which is the digital AI extension of you. And that high bandwidth connection is what achieves a tight symbiosis. It's an internet in the sky. Well, we don't talk that much about Starlink, but essentially it's intended to provide low latency, high bandwidth internet connectivity throughout the world. There actually will not be enough cognitive processing power on board the satellite system to in any way be a Skynet thing. Like digital AI requires a lot of superintelligence, requires a lot of big servers on the ground. It's too power intensive. But this is intended to provide people with who don't have any internet connectivity with internet connectivity, and it's very good for sparse and sparsely populated and moderately sparsely populated areas, and for giving people in cities a choice of low-cost choice of internet access. But I do think it's going to be important. The Starlink system will be important in providing the funding necessary for SpaceX to develop interplanetary spacecraft, and at the same time, helping people who have either no or super expensive connectivity and giving people in urban areas more of a competitive choice. The form of government on Mars would be somewhat of a direct democracy, where you vote on issues, where people vote directly on issues, instead of going through representative government. When the United States was formed, representative government was the only thing that was logistically feasible, because it was no way for people to communicate instantly. A lot of people didn't even have really access to mailboxes, or there wasn't even really the post office was very primitive. A lot of people couldn't write. So you had to have some form of representative democracy, or things just wouldn't work at all. But I think on Mars, most likely it's going to be everyone votes on every issue, and that's how it goes. There are a few things I'd recommend, which is keep laws short. Long laws, it's like that's something suspicious is going on if there's a long law. If the size of the law exceeds the word count of Lord of the Rings, something's
Might be, if we don't improve our pace of progress, I'm definitely, going to be dead before we go to Mars. So I'm just would like to not be dead by the time we go to Mars. That's my aspiration here. So if it's taken us 18 years just to get ready to do the first people to orbit, we better improve our rate of innovation, or, based on past trends, I am definitely going to be dead before Mars. So we've got to improve our pace of innovation a lot. Well, it's only got 14 kids now, and it'll have 20 kids in September. It's called AdAstra, which means to the stars. That's maybe a bit different from most other schools, is that there aren't any grades. There's no not grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 type of thing. Making all the children go in the same grade at the same time, like an assembly line.
I know.
Because some people love English or languages, some people love math, some people love music. and they have different abilities at different times. It makes more sense to cater the education to match their aptitudes and abilities. So I think that's one principle. Another is that it's important to teach problem solving, or teach to the problem, not to the tools. So this would be like, let's say you're trying to teach people about how engines work, or you could start by a more traditional approach would be to say, well, we're going to teach you all about screwdrivers and wrenches, and you're going to have a course on screwdrivers, a course on wrenches, and all these things. And this is a very difficult way to do it. A much better way would be like, here's the engine. Now let's take it apart. How are we going to take it apart? Oh, you need a screwdriver. That's what the screwdriver is for. You need a wrench. That's what the wrench is for. And then a very important thing happens, which is that the relevance of the tools becomes apparent.
So all your 5 boys are in that school?
Yes.
Until when? This is from
I don't know.
preschool
So far, it's
to...
only 1-year-old. It took us many iterations to get the suit to. We really wanted to look great. Fundamentally, what it's about is like we want to inspire kids to say that one day they want to wear that uniform, they want to wear that spacesuit, and get them fired up about, I want to be an astronaut. I want to work on aerospace engineering. I want to advance space flight. And I think what today is about is reigniting the dream of space.
Well, I was just saying that you want to take a moment to appreciate things in life and the sensations. Food's incredible, and there's just so many good things that you can experience. Some of them cost nothing, really. Have a walk in nature, or just a nice meal, and it's like, wow, it was pretty great, And we should take a moment to appreciate these little things, the big things, the things that move your heart. I think that's probably the meaning of life, as close a definition as I can think.
Then we also have the Tesla Dojo system, which is a training system, and that's intended to be able to process vast amounts of video data to improve the training for the AI system. So the Dojo system, and that's like a FP16 training system that is primarily constrained by heat and by communication between the chips. And so we're developing new buses and new sort of heat rejection or cooling systems that enable a very high tera-op, a very high op, more than tera, a very high operation computer that will be able to process video data effectively. How do we see the evolution of AI algorithms? I'm not sure the best way to understand this, except that what the neural net seems to mostly do is take a massive amount of information from reality, primarily passive optical, and create a vector space, essentially compress a massive amount of photons into a vector space. And I was just thinking, actually, on the drive this morning, that have you tried accessing the vector space in your mind? Like, we normally take reality just for granted in kind of like an analog way, but you can actually, I think, access the vector space in your mind and understand what your mind is doing to take in all the world data. And what it is actually doing is trying to remember the least amount of information possible. So it's taking a massive amount of information, filtering it down, and saying what is relevant, and then how do you create a vector space world that is a very, very tiny percentage of that original data. And then based on that vector space representation, you make decisions. And so it's like really a decompression that's just going on a massive scale, which is kind of like how physics is. Like, think of physics algorithms as essentially compression algorithms for reality. So that's what physics does. Those physics formulas are compression algorithms for reality, which is like, this may sound very obvious, but if you simply, what it means is like, and we are the proof points of this, If you simply ran a true physics simulation of the universe, this would obviously take a lot of compute, but a true physics simulation of the universe, if you give it enough time, eventually you will have sentience. The proof of that is us. And if you believe in physics and the origins of the universe, it started out as sort of quarks and leptons, and there was hydrogen for quite a while, and then helium and lithium, and then there were supernovas, the heavy elements formed, and billions of years later, some of those heavy elements learned to talk. And so we are essentially evolved hydrogen. If you just leave hydrogen out for a while, it turns into us. I think people don't quite appreciate this. So you say, like, where does the specialness come in? Where does sentience come in? Like, either the whole universe is sentient and special, or nothing is, or maybe it's like you could say, like, at what point from hydrogen to us did it become sentient?
With SpaceX, originally I started off just thinking, well, how do I increase NASA's budget? Actually, that was my goal. So it was like 2001, with just talking to a friend of mine, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I thought, well, I was wondering, like, I'd like to get involved in space, but I just didn't think there was anything I could do as an individual, but I was curious as to when NASA would be sending a team to Mars, because that was always going to be the thing to do after the moon. I figured that there'd be some plan, and I'd just go to the website and I could read the schedule. And
then Mars occurs.
Like, oh yeah, it's like, okay, 2017, good, okay. But actually there wasn't anything on the website, and or at least I thought, like, can I not find it? Like, what's going on here? And is it secret? I don't know. But it turned out that that NASA had done a study on what it would cost to do a manned Mars mission, and this was under Bush the First, and in his first, he asked for a 90-day study shortly after taking office, and NASA came back with a $500 billion price tag, and he said, okay, maybe not.
Billion with a B.
That's when $500 billion was serious money.
Yeah, I think it's quite likely that we'd want to bioengineer new organisms that are better suited to living on Mars. I mean, humanity's kind of done that over time by sort of selective breeding. Cows didn't evolve in the wild, but that's a very slow process, requires hundreds of generations, whereas I think with actual bioengineering you could make that happen a lot faster, maybe with more precision. Ideally, long term, although this is a tricky subject, you'd want to write genetics.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning you'd want to create synthetic organisms.
Completely synthetic organisms?
Not necessarily completely, but start with some base and then modify stuff. The last NASA estimate was $500 billion, and that was during Bush the First. So I would imagine today's estimate is $1 trillion. Now we're not going to go spend $1 trillion on sending like 4 people to Mars. So right now the cost of going to Mars is beyond what can be afforded. So that's why there's like no one's going to Mars. But ultimately, in order to establish a colony, I think you've got to get the cost down to maybe $500,000 or less per person to go. And there's got to be an intersection of sets of people that can afford to go and people that want to go.
All right. I'd like to thank you for leaving crazy person out of the description. So I thought, I was trying to think, what is the most useful thing that what could I say that could actually be helpful or useful to you in the future? And I thought I'd perhaps tell the story of how I sort of came to be here. How did some of these things happen? And maybe there's some lessons there, because I often find myself wondering, how did this happen? So when I was young, I didn't really know what I was going to do when I got older. People kept asking me, but then eventually I thought that the idea of inventing things would be really cool. And The reason I thought that was because I read a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which said that a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that's really true. If you go back, say 300 years, the things that we take for granted today would be you'd be burned at the stake for. Being able to fly, that's crazy. Being able to see over long distances, being able to communicate, having effectively with the internet a group mind of sorts, and having access to all the world's information instantly from almost anywhere on the earth. This is stuff that really would be magic, or would be considered magic in times past. In fact, I think it actually goes beyond that, because there are many things that we take for granted today that weren't even imagined in times past. They weren't even in the realm of magic. So it actually goes beyond that. So I thought, well, if I can do some of those things, basically if I can advance technology, then that's like magic, and that would be really cool. And I was at sort of a slight existential crisis, because I was trying to figure out what does it all mean? Like, what's the purpose of things? And I came to the conclusion that if we can advance the knowledge of the world, if we can do things that expand the scope and scale of consciousness, then we're better able to ask the right questions and become more enlightened, and that's really the only way forward. So I studied physics and business, because I figured in order to do a lot of these things, you need to know how the universe works, and you need to know how the economy works. And you also need to be able to bring a lot of people together to work with you to create something, because it's very difficult to do something as an individual if it's a significant technology.
Is the ambition still to find another CEO for one or the other?
Well, I expect to run both companies for the foreseeable future, because I've made a commitment to people at both companies to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Will I be running both companies forever? I think that's unlikely, but certainly for the foreseeable future, I will be.
Is there one that has your heart more than the other one?
Well, no, they both do have my heart, but I think that there may come a point, several years in the future, where the fundamental good that Tesla is trying to accomplish, which is to serve as a catalyst for the acceleration of sustainable transport, has been accomplished. In other words, that's really what Tesla, if you look at it from an historical standpoint, or what's important here in affecting the world. It's to what degree is Tesla serving as a catalyst for the advent of electric vehicles? Mm-hmm. At some point, when say most cars being manufactured are electric, then that will have been accomplished, and or the catalytic value of Tesla will have been realized, and there'll be diminishing returns in that regard. And I think at that point, I would not need to run the company.
Mm-hmm. See, are you now like, fuck no, I am not starting another company? Are you still thinking that?
Yes, that's how I feel. That is. I've actually, there are three things that I think, arguably four, that I think could be done. I think I could probably do it, maybe, have a better than even chance of success. One is an electric jet, this would be kind of something cool. Because one of the things that, I guess, where these things tend to come from is, like, I'll read something that seems like a sad thing in technology, and they're like, well, how could we make it not a sad thing? So when I read about the Concorde being retired, and I was like, oh, geez, we don't even have supersonic transport. That's terrible. Mm-hmm. And I actually didn't have a chance to fly on the Concorde, so that just seemed like a terrible thing. So initially I thought, well, I started reading up about it, and I read that the Concorde was really designed in the 60s, and so aerodynamics have improved a great deal with computational fluid dynamics. Engine efficiencies improved massively, and even if you just changed the engines on the Concorde, you could double the range. Mm-hmm. or thereabouts. And so then I thought, well, okay, well, what if you were to figure out a really efficient design that could make it economically competitive to have a supersonic aircraft, and then I started looking at it more and more, and then as I started doing the math on all of it, it seemed like, well, you just really want to go higher and higher. The lower you are in the atmosphere, the more drag you have. Atmospheric density decays exponentially. So as you go up, your air density just drops dramatically, and it's really easy to go fast. And I mean, and your speed is just a force balance. It's whatever the output thrust of the engine is, balanced against the drag that you're experiencing. So as you go higher, you just go faster for the same force. And then there's a slight outward acceleration you experience, which is also slightly helpful, like a satellite. When a satellite's going Mach 25, it just goes on forever once it's out of the atmosphere. So anyway, this is maybe slightly laborious, but an electric fan gets better. An electric aircraft gets better the higher you go, whereas a combustion aircraft does not. You start starving it from oxygen. And only, but the air is mostly nitrogen. So as you're going through the air, you're sort of sucking in all this nitrogen, which is just kind of slowing you down, and then you're trying to combust the oxygen. Anyway, so with aircraft, with combustion aircraft, you hit an optimal altitude that's in the sort of 35 to maybe 55 max altitude, whereas an electric aircraft you'd want to go at like maybe 80,000 feet. Anyway, it's a long way of saying you can get super efficient and super fast with an electric aircraft, and vertical takeoff and landing works well with being supersonic. And anyway, so I think you could make a really breakthrough aircraft that's several generations beyond what currently exists. Well, the third one would be I think you could make fusion work, I mean by that I mean magnetic confinement fusion, relatively standard fusion, if you will,
Exactly.
So you can kind of get a car for free. Is that really likely?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what will happen. So there will be a shared autonomy fleet where you buy your car, and you can choose to use that car exclusively. You could choose to have it be used only by friends and family, only by 5-star other drivers who are rated 5-star. You can choose to share it sometimes, but not other times. That's 100% what will occur.
I think direct democracy is less susceptible to corruption than representative democracy. So, corruption just being like, to what degree is this action being taken that do not serve the interests of the population? Do not result in a net increase in population happiness as a whole. So that's why I think probably direct is better. And then just have things in real time. So if you want to vote on something, you can vote on it real fast.
Do you think we'll make contact with alien within the next 50 years?
Well, that's a really tough one to say. If there are super intelligent aliens out there, they're probably already observing us. That would seem quite likely, and we just are not smart enough to realize it. But I can do some back-of-the-envelope calculations, and any advanced alien civilization that was at all interested in populating the galaxy, even without exceeding the speed of light, even if you're only moving at, say, 10 or 20% of the speed of light, you could populate the entire galaxy in, let's say, 10 million years. Maybe 20 million years max. This is nothing, in the grand scheme of things. what to do about mass unemployment. This is going to be a massive social challenge. And I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. I don't think we're going to have a choice.
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income, I think it's going to be necessary.
So it means that unemployed people will be paid across the globe.
Yeah.
Because there is no job, machine, robot is taking over.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better.
Okay.
That's simply and I want to be clear that these are not things that I think that I wish would happen. These are simply things that I think probably will happen. And if my assessment is correct and they probably will happen, then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary. Now, the output of goods and services will be extremely high. So with automation, there will come abundance. There will be almost everything will get very cheap. I think I think we'll just end up doing a universal basic income. It's going to be necessary. The harder challenge, much harder challenge, is how do people then have meaning? Like a lot of people, they derive their meaning from their employment. So if you don't have, if you're not needed, if there's not a need for your labor, how do you? What's the meaning? Do you have meaning? Do you feel useless? That's a much harder problem to deal with.